Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about narrow kerf chains. A lot of people think that there's not much difference in the narrow kerf. I always measure the tooth width just to make sure what the difference is between a standard chain and a narrow kerf chain. I generally don't measure the tooth on the outside of the left to the outside of the right, because when you talk about kerf, it's the width that the tooth cuts. So if I'm saying that a tooth has a narrower kerf, well, the overall width between the left and the right will be reduced. So I guess I should quote the two figures, and that's what I'm going to do today. So the bar, and I've got a 3/8 Samura bar, it's got a width of 4.6 millimeters wide. So none of these 3/8 chains are below that figure, otherwise you'd be in trouble. So the standard RS chain, which is this one here, this is Still's standard RS chain. It's got a total width from the left tooth to the right tooth, so its kerf is 6.7 millimeters wide. The tooth width is 4.5 millimeters. So that's the difference. So you can see the overlap that you've got. Hexa, the total width is reduced to 6 millimeters. Its tooth width is 4.1 millimeters. So you can see that it also has, all chainsaw tooth have the overlap where the tooth crosses over, meets in the middle on the drive link and crosses over. Husqvarna's X-Cut C85, tooth width 4.2 millimeters, total kerf between the left and the right 6 millimeters. Last one, 0.325. 058 gauge, total width 4.2 millimeters. The total width of the kerf between the left and the right is 6.6 millimeters. So you can see that the Husky's X-Cut and the Hexa are very, very close. Not much difference in it at all. Now the easiest way to measure, this is an RS, this is the Still RS chain, is that these are straight edges, and you put it against two teeth. You put the other side against two teeth and take the caliper, zero it, and it should be around 6.6 millimeters, 6.58, 6.64. So one thing I notice about measuring chainsaw chain, whether it's, you always got a variation, because remember these things are stamped out by the millions. So you know, you can always end up with a slight variation here and there. So you can clearly see that there's a reduction of the kerf on Hexa and X-Cut, and this reduction allows extra, you're reducing the load of the actual tooth, and therefore it's a little bit easier for it to cut the timber, and having that aggressive angle on it also helps. Now Husqvarna with their C85 X-Cut has got a much more aggressive angle, really aggressive. It's like 40 degrees. It is super aggressive. Look at that angle there. That is a really aggressive angle. And there's its narrower kerf. And you put a file through that, you'll destroy the shape. There is no file for that except a round file. And that's actually what's recommended on the box. 732 5.5 round file. So that's that. And then if you look at Still's Hexa, that's what that looks like. That's your reduced kerf there. And you can see where the tooth goes well over the drive link in the middle, really crosses over. Especially there, you can see that. Especially at the front. Have a look at the front of the tooth, how much it goes over. The other thing is, and that's an interesting If you measure the front of the tooth, I think if you remember before I said it was about 4.1 millimeters, 4.12. If you measure the back of the tooth at the witness mark, 3.69. So that's the difference. Then if you were to look at the standard RS chain, that's your RS chain. But do you notice that the tip of it, very pointy as well? Just that tip, 0.5 millimeter of that point. And let's just put the hexa up against, and you'll see, you'll notice a difference in the kerf. I think you can, without me telling you, which one is the hexa and which one is the RS chain. I think you'll clearly see there's the hexa and there's the RS on the bottom. So narrow kerf chains are very interesting. If you do want to make hexa and you want to do it very cheaply and do it as close as possible, I recommend 0.325 at 0.58 gauge. Now this suits a 20 inch bar. Notice there's 80 drive links. Now normally a 3/8 chain has 72 drive links. So you've got an extra 8 drive links on here. More cut-in power. Reduced kerf. You can see why 0.325 is used by professionals in, say, medium type saws, like the MS261, only around 50 cc's. And that's what a lot of the pro saws, smaller pro saws use, 0.325. Yeah, now, I've noticed in the 063 gauge that the kerf is about the same as 3/8 chain. So when we talk 0.235 at 063 gauge, I can tell you what, there's virtually not much difference in it. It's hardly worth, you wouldn't even notice. If I gave you 2 chainsaws and I had one with 0.325, 063 gauge, and then I gave you a 3/8 chain, and they're both full chisels, you're going to probably be struggling to tell me which one's which. Someone's going to be able to pick it, but I tell you what, there's only going to be, with all these things that I'm talking about, the narrow kerfs, and you're talking about a 25-degree angle and a 30-degree angle on the top plate, then the top plate cutting angle is 55 degrees versus 60. All of these things that we're talking about, oh, and this is only a hair difference than that one, and that one's just a fraction different than this one. At best, we're talking probably no more than a maximum of 10% between a standard full chisel and a hexa. So anywhere between 5 to 10%. The one that loses out on all of this is your semi-chisel. Semi-chisel is the slowest out of all of the chains. Then we jump up into the full chisel. Then the full chisel, we start to play around with hexa and X-cut. But I have noticed on a lot of the chains that are coming out from all the other manufacturers that they're putting a little, an extra point on the working corner rather than the full C shape. It is not a full, nice curve. They're putting a little bit of an extra point, a little bit of a straight section on it. I've noticed that on a lot of chains coming out lately, because that little flat section on the down plate rather than a curve really seems to pierce the timber and have a good chipping action, because a chainsaw tooth doesn't cut in literally like a knife. the chainsaw tooth digs in, just like you would dig in a shovel into the ground and pulling it backwards. That's exactly how a chainsaw tooth works. It digs into the tooth, and because of the rocking motion and the forces going around, the chain going around and the motor pulling the chain, it pulls the tooth back out straight, and that lifts the chip out. And the next tooth comes along and does the same. And this is happening about 20,000 times per minute. 20 to 25,000 roughly on around about 10, 12,000 RPM. So you get that amount of chips coming out. So sometimes you'll see an animation of a miner digging a tunnel and he's got a little pick and he's just picking away. Well, this is exactly how a chainsaw works, cutting through a log. Each tooth is chipping away, and that's what it does. And that's why I guess Joseph Cox invented the Cox chipper chain, because that's what it does. It chips away. The left side does a chip, the right side does a chip. The one behind it comes along, finishes off, and does its little bit. So I hope that explains about narrow kerf. And obviously, if you've got a narrow kerf chain, it's going to put less stress on the saw. Typically, narrow kerf chains, if you've got a big saw in excess of up to 80 cc's, you don't really need these narrow kerf chains. You've got enough power in the chainsaw that will have a lot of cutting power to pull that chain through. And that's why, like on an 80 cc chainsaw, you can go to a 404 chain, and that's a much wider kerf. So typically when we're talking about narrow kerf chains, we're talking about smaller chainsaws to medium chainsaws that can benefit from you, and it depends what timber that you're cutting. So that's the benefit of using narrow kerf. It's a little bit more effective in certain situations. It may not be effective in all situations, but in some situations, and that's the variation that you've got, and that's what people have. Some people have a personal preference and say, look, I'm using this chain, I'm 100% happy with it. Other people will criticise it, and I guess that's your choice to make, whether you want to use it or whether you want to criticise it. Everybody has an opinion in chainsaws. Everybody's an expert. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.